You are the type of owner who believes a dog is family, not a convenience, not a possession. Family. So what happens when a dog believes that too and the family simply never comes back? Every evening for 7 years, one dog walked to the same gate, sat down and waited. He never stopped believing. This is what that kind of loyalty looks like when it has nowhere left to go. There is a particular kind of silence that settles over a shelter in the evening. The barking fades. The staff go home. And somewhere in that quiet, a dog finds his spot, the same spot, every single night and waits. Not pacing, not whining, just sitting at the gate, eyes fixed on the entrance, watching for headlights that never come. His name was Moose, and his story is not just about abandonment. It is about what loyalty does to a dog when loyalty is all he has left. The day Moose arrived at Cloverfield Animal Shelter, it was raining. That detail matters, not for atmosphere, but because it was the kind of day that makes everything feel more final. The woman who brought him in carried his food bowl from the car, a blue plastic bowl with a crack along the rim, and handed it to the intake volunteer without making eye contact. She signed the surrender paperwork quickly. She said she was moving. She said it wouldn't be possible to take him along. She said he was a good dog. Then she drove away. Moose was 4 years old. He stood in the intake room and watched the door close. He did not bark. He did not try to follow. He simply stood there as if waiting for someone to explain what was happening. Nobody could. In the days that followed, the shelter staff noted that Moose was unusually calm for a newly surrendered dog. He ate his meals. He accepted handling without resistance. He was gentle with volunteers during walks. On paper, he was exactly the kind of dog that gets adopted quickly, easygoing, affectionate, house-trained, good with people. But something strange happened around day 5. A volunteer named Dana was doing the evening rounds when she noticed Moose standing at the far end of his kennel run, pressed against the chain-link fence, staring toward the shelter's main entrance gate. She assumed he had heard something outside. She finished her rounds. When she passed again 20 minutes later, he was still there, same position, same stillness. She mentioned it to the morning shift. They shrugged. Dogs do odd things in shelters, but Moose did it again the next evening, and the evening after that. By the second week, it was no longer a curiosity, it was a ritual. Every afternoon, around the time the light shifted and the temperature dropped slightly, Moose would move to the corner of his run closest to the entrance gate and sit. Not restlessly, not anxiously. He would simply sit and watch, with the kind of focused patience that is almost uncomfortable to witness in an animal. The staff began calling it his vigil. They assumed it would stop. Most surrender behaviors do. Dogs adjust, researchers tell us, because they have to. The world they knew disappears and the world in front of them gradually becomes real. That is what usually happens. Moose did not adjust. 3 months passed. He was passed over for adoption twice, once because a family wanted a younger dog, once because another dog in the household reacted poorly during a meet and greet. Each time, Moose went back to his kennel. Each evening, he went back to the gate. The shelter manager, a woman named Ruth who had worked in animal welfare for over a decade, later described watching Moose during those early months as one of the more quietly heartbreaking things she had witnessed in her career. Not because he was dramatic about it, because he wasn't. He never howled at the gate. He never destroyed his bedding out of distress. He simply waited with a composure that felt almost like faith. And that faith, Ruth said, was the hardest part to watch. By the end of the first year, the staff had stopped expecting the behavior to fade. It had become part of the shelter's daily rhythm, the way the overhead lights flickered at dusk, the way the old heater kicked on with a clank every evening. And there was Moose. At the gate, they gave him a better kennel space. They increased his enrichment. Volunteers took him on longer walks, introduced puzzle feeders, signed him up for play sessions with other dogs. He engaged with all of it willingly. He was not a broken dog in the way people imagine a broken dog looks: cowering, withdrawn, skittish. He was present and affectionate during the day. But when the light changed, he went back. A behavioral consultant visited the shelter during year 2. She observed Moose for several days and offered a careful assessment. Dogs, she explained, do not experience time the way humans do. They do not sit with a conscious narrative of waiting, no internal voice counting the days. But they do form extraordinarily powerful associations. The gate, the light, the time of day, all of it had become fused with a single expectation. Someone is coming. This is when they come. Breaking that association, she said, would require patience. Possibly a very specific kind of home environment. Possibly a person who understood what they were taking on. She paused before adding, some dogs carry their past associations their entire lives. It does not make them less capable of love. It makes them more in need of it. The shelter began featuring Moose in adoption outreach. They shared his story on their social media pages, carefully and without sentimentality. The response was significant. Thousands of people shared his posts, many of them expressing heartbreak, many of them saying he reminded them of something they couldn't quite name. But the shares did not convert into applications. Or rather, the applications that came in were often unsuitable people drawn to the story without truly understanding the commitment involved. A dog like Moose did not need rescuing in the dramatic sense. He needed consistency, permanence, a home that would stay. Year 3 brought a small turning point and a complication. A couple named Greg and Marielle applied to adopt Moose after seeing his profile. They visited 3 times. Moose responded warmly to both of them. The staff felt cautiously hopeful. On the 4th visit, Greg knelt down in the yard and Moose walked directly to him and pressed his forehead against Greg's knee, a gesture so deliberate that 2 volunteers standing nearby exchanged a look without saying anything. The adoption was approved. Moose went home with Greg and Marielle on a Thursday. He was back at the shelter 11 days later. Marielle had developed a severe allergic reaction, not to Moose specifically, but to something in the combination of their older cat and a newly adopted dog. The doctor was unambiguous. The dog had to go. Greg called Ruth in tears. He said it was the hardest phone call he had ever made. He said Moose had slept on the floor beside the bed every night, that he had started to come when called without hesitation, that he had seemed, and Greg paused here, searching for the word settled. Moose came back to the shelter on a Friday afternoon. That evening, he went to the gate. Ruth watched him from the office window and later wrote in her journal, not the shelter's official log, her personal journal, that she had never felt the inadequacy of language more sharply than in that moment. There was nothing to say to a dog who had just had a home for 11 days and then had it taken away for reasons that had nothing to do with him. There was no explanation that would reach him. There was only the gate and his willingness to keep believing in it. The shelter staff quietly decided something after that. They would not rush Moose's next placement. They would not push him toward any adoption that carried uncertainty. They began, informally, to think of him as theirs, not owned, but tended. A responsibility that the building itself had taken on. Volunteers who had been with the shelter for years began scheduling their shifts around his evening ritual. Not to interrupt it, just to be nearby. Someone started leaving a blanket folded in the corner of his run closest to the gate, so that when he settled into his vigil, he had something soft beneath him. Nobody made an announcement about it. It simply appeared one day and everyone understood. Year 4, year 5. Moose was now 8 years old. His muzzle had gone gray in the way that happens gradually, And then all at once one morning you look and realize the dog you knew as young has moved, without ceremony, into a different chapter. He moved more slowly on cold mornings. He still played during yard time, but he tired faster. He still greeted every person who walked through the shelter door with the same quiet attentiveness, the same look that said, "Without drama, is it you? Are you the one?" It never was. But something else was happening during those middle years, something the staff noticed but found difficult to articulate. Moose had become a kind of anchor for the shelter itself. New dogs arriving in distress would sometimes calm more quickly when kenneled near him. Volunteers who came in on hard days when an animal had suffered, days when the weight of the work was too much, would stop at Moose's kennel and spend a few minutes with him, and leave feeling something they couldn't name but needed. He had a quality that some people have too, a stillness that does not demand anything from you, that simply makes the room feel less chaotic. Ruth noted in the shelter's fifth-year review that Moose had become something they hadn't planned for and couldn't replace. She wrote it plainly. Without ornamentation, he is part of how this place works. Year 6 brought another adoption inquiry this time. A retired school teacher named Evelyn who lived alone in a house with a large fenced yard. She had lost her dog of 14 years the previous winter. She was not looking to fill a hole, she told Ruth during their first conversation. She was looking to give a good life to a dog who needed one. She had read about Moose. She had thought about it for 3 months before calling. She visited once. She sat on a bench in the yard and did not call Moose to her. She simply sat. After about 4 minutes, Moose walked over and sat beside her. Not on her lap, beside her. The way you sit beside someone you've known long enough to be quiet with. Evelyn did not move. She did not speak. She rested one hand on his back and looked at the fence line. Ruth, watching from the doorway, made a decision. The adoption process moved carefully and thoroughly. Every step was taken with the knowledge of what another disruption would mean. Evelyn's home was evaluated. Her references were contacted. Her vet history was reviewed. The staff visited her house. The yard was assessed. Ruth drove past the neighborhood on a Sunday afternoon, not as part of any official process, just to look. She did not tell anyone she did this. Moose went home with Evelyn on a Tuesday in November, nearly 7 years after the rainy afternoon he had arrived. The evening of his first day in her home, Evelyn later told Ruth, she watched him move through each room at his own pace, nose working, taking inventory of his new world. She had set up his bed in the living room. She had placed his food bowl. She had asked for the cracked blue bowl the shelter had kept in the kitchen corner. Around dusk, she noticed him standing at the back door, looking out toward the fence. Her heart dropped. She opened the door. He walked out to the yard and stood at the gate for several minutes. Evelyn stood on the porch and waited. She did not call him back. She understood, without needing it explained, that this was something he had to do. After a while, he turned around and walked back to the house. He came inside. He ate his dinner. He lay down on his bed. He did not go back to the gate that evening. Evelyn called Ruth the next morning, and Ruth later said that the call lasted less than 2 minutes. Evelyn said only he slept through the night. He's eating. He seems okay. And then, after a pause, I think he knows he's home. The gate vigils did not disappear entirely. For the first several weeks, Moose still drifted toward the fence at dusk. But the duration shortened. The intensity softened. He began turning back sooner. By the second month, there were evenings when he skipped it entirely, when he stayed on the porch with Evelyn, or simply lay in the yard without facing the fence at all. Ruth described it as a slow exhale, as if something inside him was releasing pressure it had been holding for years. He lived with Evelyn for 4 more years. He never fully lost the evening habit. Evelyn grew to think of it as his way of marking time, the way some people pause at windows without knowing why. But it changed in character. It was no longer vigil. It was something quieter, almost contemplative. Evelyn said near the end that she believed he had made peace with whatever he had been waiting for, not because the waiting was answered, but because he had found something it took him 7 years to locate, a place where the evening could come, and he did not have to brace himself against it. Moose was 12 years old when he died, peacefully at home with Evelyn beside him. The shelter staff planted a small tree in the yard where he used to sit. They did not put up a sign. They did not need to. Everyone who had been there knew which tree it was and what it meant. And what does this story mean beyond the grief it carries, beyond the love it demonstrates? It means that loyalty is not conditional on being deserved. Moose did not wait because the family who left him had earned his faithfulness. He waited because waiting was what love looked like to him. That is a quality so rare in the world that most of us can barely recognize it when we see it. It also means that it is never too late. 7 years is a long time to wait, but Evelyn found him. And whatever remained in him, whatever had not been worn down by years of disappointment, was enough, more than enough. The gate was always empty, but the dog who waited at it was not. If this story stayed with you, take a moment right now to share it with someone who loves dogs. There is a moose in a shelter somewhere today, quiet, steady, still waiting. And somewhere, there is a person who is exactly what that dog needs. Sometimes stories like this are the thing that connects them. Share it. You might not know whose life it changes. Dogs understand loyalty in ways most humans never will. Subscribe for more powerful stories every week, and check the links below for books, gear, and essentials inspired by these incredible dogs.